If you count both Operation Enduring Freedom, which ended back in 2014, and Operation Freedom Sentinels, which has been going on ever since then, these United States have been at war almost 16 years running now. It's the longest period of any time in our history. We don't even talk about it much these days anymore, and I get a little concerned about that sometimes, because when war becomes normal, when it becomes just the fabric of how we exist, I think that somehow harms us, harms our collective soul. And it's Memorial Day weekend, and it's time to pause and to remember those who have died and to reflect a little on the cost of war. A couple of months ago, I was at the Boy Scouts Eagle Court of Honor, and for the troop in which I'm a chaplain for. And I talked to a lieutenant colonel in the Marines who came to award his nephew his Eagle Scout award. And he walks with a limp from wounds sustained that he wears a Purple Heart for now. And he's back stateside now after his 4th deployment. That's nearly 4 years of being away from his spouse and his kids. And at this point, there are nearly 4 million kids who have experienced having a parent deployed to combat. And like most church communities, we have people in our community who have gone through that, had that experience firsthand. We have families that know the experience of parenting during, before, and after deployment. Many of you have lived through post-traumatic stress syndrome, be it your own or a spouse's or a child's. A few years ago, I was called by an Air Force chaplain friend of mine. Her name is Heather Bodwell. She is a chaplain with the United States Air Force, and she's been deployed twice. And I haven't gotten to see her much these last couple of years, but she's one of those friends that whenever I get together with, we just kind of pick up right where we start off. Somebody at the first service said those are what she called old shoe friends, that you just pick up and it's just a comfortable relationship. Well, a couple of years ago, Heather called me up because she asked me if I would go visit a spouse and a mother of 2 kids with somebody that she was aware of who were living in the Kansas City area. And they had 2 kids, age 4 and 13 at that time. Joel had been deployed to Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. And their daughter was 13, and she had gone from nearly straight A's to D's and F's. And their 4-year-old just missed Dad. And there's no way to explain to a 4-year-old what a year is. It might as well be an eternity. And the day that Joel left, the dishwasher broke. And she said it was like a sign of what was to come. The wheels just came off. The school counselor started calling after a matter of weeks, wanting to have the parents come in, not knowing what was going on at home. And Kim and Joel, you know, we live in this time where you have video, you can talk to your spouse video each day. I don't know if that always helps, but Kim and Joel could barely speak to each other. Their frustration level was so high. And when I went to their place, I remember walking up, the lawn was like ankle high. I mean, it had not been mowed in probably a couple months. Kim invited me in, and she shared with me a little bit about what was going on. Kim was proud of Joel's service, but she also blamed him. Her message was clear. If only you had been here, we wouldn't be going through all of this. Jesus had a friend named Lazarus and his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. And they lived in Judea, a couple days' travel south of Galilee where Jesus lived. And Mary and Martha sent a message to Jesus that Lazarus was very ill. And Jesus told his disciples that they were going to go back down to Judea to see his friend Lazarus. But the disciples were not wild about that idea, since the religious collaborators in Judea wanted to stone Jesus and all of them. Even so, they went with him after a couple days' delay.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was a little less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to comfort Martha and Mary after their brother's death. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary remained in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died."
If only you had been here. That's a lot to drop on another person, particularly at some level if there's some truth to it. You can try to reassure somebody. Other military spouses had reminded Kim of the duty that comes with wearing the uniform, reminded her of the resources that are available to them.
Jesus told Martha, "Your brother will rise again." Martha replied, "I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She replied, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, God's Son, the one who is coming into the world."
But even a strong faith doesn't mean that you're not going to hurt. Joel and Kim were committed to each other. They loved each other. But that doesn't mean that they didn't hurt, that they weren't hurting each other, that somehow that they were immune to the fear, the anger, and the pain.
When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to cry.
Even the strongest faith, even the strongest sense of duty, doesn't mean that sometimes you're not going to hurt. Suffering is a part of life. Jesus knew this well. But he also came for something greater. Because there is much more to this life than suffering. And together with one another and together with God, we are called to make a difference, to alleviate suffering, so that no one faces anything alone. That together we can face whatever comes up in our lives. But that only works if you're willing to honestly share what's going on with you. Because no one can know the heart of another person. Blue Star families, those families that have one or both parents in military service, they only make up about 1% of the families in this nation. However, that is still over 4 million kids in every community. Here are a few. Each of us has our own story. For Blue Star kids, it's not the same as kids whose parents are gone often for work or for meetings or for conferences, because they're doing some pretty scary stuff. And when their parents come home, they're often wounded, minds, bodies, and spirits. And despite all of the wonders of social media and communication, there is no substitute for that person who comes over and mows your grass. They have not got a Skype session that can mow your grass. And that is love made real. That's love made incarnate. So can I tell you what I've seen? Sometimes there are no words. There are no words that anybody can say that will make things okay. There's nothing I could have told Kim that was going to change the circumstances of what was going on in the deployment. But they were facing it alone. They were trying to bottle it up, and it wasn't working. And sometimes what you really need is for somebody just to come by and to mow the lawn, to scrub the toilets, to watch the kids so that you can have a few hours just to get out and get groceries. Jesus would sometimes give people a sign from God that God always hears us and that we are never alone.
Some people said he healed the eyes of a man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone covered the entrance. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus replied, "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see God's glory?" So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me." Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied and his face covered with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go."
It was a sign. It was a sign that God hears and understands, and that we are not alone. It was a sign to Jesus' disciples, the people who would follow him and who were going to become the church, that we are to stand in solidarity, to hear and cry with those who are suffering, and then to be as Christ to them. To be love incarnate, love made real. So on this Memorial Day weekend, I want to call attention to those Blue Star families in our communities. To see them. To recognize they are with us. And become to them love in action. I was amazed at the hope and healing that started with just a mowed lawn. The last that I heard from Heather, Kim and Joel are okay. He's gotten back from deployment now, and they have a new church community. They live further out up in Independence. And the church that I contacted that sent over the person to mow the lawn, they're part of that community now, and they're giving back too. Because none of us have to face life alone. May all those who follow in Jesus' way find ways of making love real. of reaching out to bless all the families of the earth. Amen.